today's match, round 2 of Chessborn against Lina. Lina has managed to win the first game, so it is up to Chessborn to get revenge. She is a player from Ukraine, ready for sharp and open position. An insider fact is that Chessborn is derived from the Game of Thrones character Daenerys Stormborn. Lina is a player from Germany, participated in Youth World Championships. If she loses, her mood drops tremendously. Trains every day, very ambitious, very sharp player as well. So we're going to see a very nice fight. Who will go through to the final of the Real Chess League? The stare down of round 2 and potentially the final game between Chessborn and Lina. Players shake the hands, the black player presses the clock.
Okay.
They wish each other a good game, and the game is off with a quick d4. Responded with a very fast play here. And we see the Queen's Gambit accepted. The classical line. Right away regaining the pawn on c4. So material balance restored. And both players are blitzing out the move. So fast. This is a theoretical line, which both players seem to know. And we see that Lina actually gained a lot of time there. The time control is 10 minutes plus 2 seconds per move. But right now it seems that Lina needs to think for a second about her next move, which could lead to believe that she is no longer in the book, which we would refer to as someone knowing the opening theory until a certain point, and then they're on their own. Which usually is a good sign if your opponent starts to think, especially for Angelika, aka Chessborn, who needs a win here with white to remain in the running for the finals. Because, like I said, she is down 1-0 after losing the first game. She got to take revenge. And we see the bishop going to b7. A very nice long diagonal for this dark squared bishop. And let's see how Angelika replies. This is also for her the first kind of real thing. And she goes queen to e2. Getting off this d file and potentially making room for the rook from f1 to swing to d1, where it can target the queen. It seems there's some moment of thinking here, because black rather not moves the bishop on f8 on the dark square, hoping that she can move it by taking back this pawn on c5 if white takes that. But yeah, that's not what happened, and we see a pawn capture, which is not recaptured surprisingly, but we see the rook to d1, pinning this black pawn, so that if it would move by capturing the knight, for example, the queen on d8 would be lost with a check. So therefore, Lina cannot take the knight on c3 and needs to find another move. Which probably means that she's looking at the development of this dark squared bishop, getting ready to castle short. And in fact, we do see this bishop move to the e7 square. And now it's time to regain this pawn on d4, I assume. Pawn takes or knight takes maybe. Since Chessborn is in need of a win, I don't think she wants to trade too many pieces. So we'll probably see a pawn capture on d4. But knight takes d4 would also be a good option. She goes for the pawn, leaving this an isolated pawn, but this imbalance could also mean a lot of tactical opportunities for both sides. And we see that Lina here finishes her development with a short castle, getting her king into safety. And now Angelika needs to find a way to complicate the position a little bit, because it seems that black has been fully developed. She needs to create something sharp. Some tactical ideas, some ways to create some play here for white. Because, yeah, she's, like I said, in need of a win. So she might be considering the pawn push to d5, trying to open the position. Or maybe develop this dark squared bishop on c1 to an active square, just to finish development. Let's see what she comes up with. I think the problem could be with the moving of the bishop is that black goes knight to d5 and just blockades the pawn maybe. On the other hand, it would also allow white to take, and then after the pawn retakes on d5, this bishop on b7 would be looking at its own pawn. So actually maybe that's not a big deal. But probably, yeah, d5 should be the critical move here. Opening up a lot of files and a very quick capture here by Lina. Apparently she was expecting this move. And we see some trades here in the center straight away. The knights are being traded. And now there's an option. There's this bishop hidden on a2 that can retake this knight. Or you can also take back with the rook, which would immediately attack the queen. On the other hand, if you take with the bishop, you are threatening a discovery check. Because then if the bishop would move, for example, to f7, taking this pawn with check, the rook on d1 would attack the queen. So let's see which of the two recaptures she chooses. She's definitely thinking here, because both ways to take seem plausible. And in fact, she goes for the rook takes, forcing the queen to move. Or maybe block it with the bishop, but then you're pinning yourself. So I would expect Lina to just simply sidestep with her queen to c7. In fact, that's exactly what she does. And now the last developing move for white should be something that I would consider to be a logical move here, which is to move this bishop on c1 to maybe g5 or e3. d2 doesn't seem like a good square. Back bishop, yeah, e3 or g5. So he goes for bishop e3. This also protects the queen from any potential rook on the e file. And it just develops her last piece, making room for this rook on a1 in the corner to get active on c or d1 later on. So yeah, white seems to have a little bit of an initiative here. Nice active pieces. Bishops are looking pretty good. But on the other hand, black is also not worse, I think, because of the full development, no weakness. This bishop on b7 is dangerously eyeing this rook in the center. And yeah, material is still completely equal. So let's see how Lina finds a way to... I mean, I think she would simplify, but then again, her playing style and the way she likes to play is sharp and tactical. So that would also not be logical for her maybe, but in line of the current standing in the tournament, a draw would be enough for her. She could try and go for this. She goes for rook c8, the rook from a8 to c8. It's a good move, getting this rook on an open file. Angelika does the same, rook to c1. The advantage for this white rook is that the queen is on c7, which makes the knight unable to move. Will we instantly see a queen? Yep, a queen move all the way back to a b8. getting off the c file and not allowing, not giving the queen away, for example, on b6, because this bishop from white on e3 in front of the queen is covering this long diagonal there. So it seems that black is a little bit passive, with the pieces a bit tucked back. So maybe Angelika can come up with some active plan here with white. And both players are unlike last game, they thought very long in the opening. It seems that both of them are having a good time management this game. They're pretty equal on the clock, and they just started with the middle game, so now they are investing most of their time into coming up with great moves and plans and ideas, which would set the most problems for your opponent. So maybe the bishop on a2 can slide back to b1, eyeing this square h7 onto the king. Or we see the rook entering on d7, coming with a threat, I believe. Because if the knight on c6 defends this dark squared bishop, so if Angelika, Chessborn, can take this knight on c6 with the rook, then the bishop would be free. Which is why Lena decides to move this bishop to an even better square and stopping it from being attacked by the rook, and goes to bishop to f6. That's a very nice square for the bishop, and improving her pieces as well. There might be some tactical motives here, where the rook takes b7, followed by a bishop d5, which is something Chessborn is probably aware of, but I don't think it works, but it's close. Because white's so active with the rook, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some tactics along the way. And she goes for bishop c5, attacking this rook on f8. That's an interesting move, because if the rook moves, that would give up the defense of f7. And remember this bishop on a2? It can take this pawn on f7. So if, for example, if the rook goes one step to the left side to e8, attacking the queen, white will have a very nice move by taking f7, check, and followed by a rook captures. So it seems that Lena is a little bit in trouble here. She goes for a knight move. She's uncertain, but she touched the piece, so she has to move it, and she goes for knight e5. A tactical solution to her problems, it seems. And the position is really starting to become critical here for both players. They both need to find very active and correct moves. I don't think white can take the rook on f8, because then black would simply play rook to c1, which is almost checkmate. You win the rook, and then you will take back on f8, and this will win an extra piece for black. So the rook on f8 cannot be taken by white. So knight e5 is a very, very nice counter blow, solving the problems and also creating new threats of black taking on f3 and crippling the pawns in front of the king. So it seems that there's no choice for Angelika to take this knight off the board, because this knight was also attacking the rook on d7. And in fact, white takes the knight on e5. So let's see how black recaptures. I think if you take with the queen, the bishop on b7 is hanging, but then black can take the bishop on c5. Very, very sharp position here. But if bishop takes e5, there's rook takes b7. I think that Lena sees it, but she goes for bishop takes e5. So now Chessborn has her chance to come back into this match by playing rook takes b7. Because if the queen takes back, then the bishop on e5 is hanging. But there might be... No, I think it works. Rook takes b7 is a very strong move for white. Or is there bishop takes h... No, yeah, okay. Black should probably play bishop h2 check. The king will go to h1. And then if the queen takes the rook on b7, the king can take this bishop on h2. So rook takes b7 here is what seems to be a very good move for white. Let's see if she finds it. No, she doesn't, and she goes for rook c2. Okay, now she is threatening the bishop, taking the rook on f8, because the rook on c1 is no longer hanging. But there's maybe bishop takes h2. Maybe bishop c6. It's a very sharp tactical position, something both players flourish in. It does seem that Angelika just missed her chance. The rook takes b7 and rook c2 is still a good move because there is a threat here for black to parry, which is this rook on f8. So let's see how Lina solves this problem. Not so easy for her. Both players still have quite a lot of time, 4 minutes and 15 seconds for Lina versus 3 minutes and 24 against Chessborn. Tough. I mean, you can take the pawn on h2 and just give up the exchange. She goes for bishop c6, counter threatening the rook. So if white takes the rook on f8, black can take the rook on d7. So with retreating this rook all the way back to d1 is also not something white wants to do, because the rook was and still is so active on d7. But yeah, there was a missed chance there, and now the rook needs to probably drop back. She's about to reach for the rook, but not sure yet. Maybe rook e7 here is a move, attacking this bishop, but it also stops this bishop on c5 attacking the rook on f8. But yeah, I mean, at least you're attacking this bishop on e5, making it move, but then there's just bishop takes h2 check. And black's bishops are looking very vicious. Let's see, I mean, 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and Chessborn is in need of a win here, so she's got to find some ways to keep the game going and make something happen. In this current sharp position, though, there's a lot of tactics and tricks and hanging material. She does go for rook e7. I mean, it sort of drops this pawn on h2. But it keeps the activity of the pieces for white, controlling a lot of files on the board. Yeah, Lina just grabs the pawn on h2 and very quickly slides the bishop back to d7. It's a great move, because now I think the bishop have to be traded. And yeah, simplification with the pawn up is everything black wants here, because of the match situation that a draw is enough. And this white bishop on c6 is so strong, especially with this king on h1. It seems that Lina is doing a really good job here with black pieces. She has to take this bishop, otherwise she just loses the exchange. So bishop d6, queen d6, and then what for white? Rook a7. Maybe there's some tactic on f7. Let's see. She's down to her last minute almost, and she decides to take the bishop. And what does she come up with now? I'm curious. She knows the time is running low. Less than a minute versus 3 minutes 46. Looking great for Lina here. Up a pawn. And actually, black's pieces are starting to look really good. And she goes for rook c3, intending maybe rook g3 or h3, trying to swing this rook over to the king side where it can start to attack the king. But the fact that the h2 pawn is gone leaves the white king more vulnerable than the black king. There's no real target for white to attack besides this f7 point, but that's securely defended for now. Lina's using her time well here. She knows she has more time and she is investing in how to find the best moves here. So this rook on f8 cannot move because then f7 falls. Maybe just all the way the bishop back to a8 is a move. But it doesn't work because white will trade rooks on c8. And like I said, this rook on f8 cannot move. But then it has to recapture, so that's not an option. So likely we'll see a queen move here to somewhere. But it's not so easy for Lina since a lot of her moves are restricted. She can't simply move a bishop or a rook. And she is shaking her head a little bit. She's aware. She's maybe not too happy with the position. Maybe Chessborn found a way to complicate matters and put Lina on the fence here of finding, a way to get active here, to keep the game going for black. Because if she does nothing, then white will maybe go rook g3 or rook h3. And things start to go sideways. And she invested over a minute and a half already. And now she's down to her last 2 minutes and only 46 seconds left for Chessborn. There is a 2 seconds increment, but still, that's not a lot. Yeah, she knows that there's not many choices here. She has to find a queen move, so where will the queen go? Where can it pose some threats or tactics? She goes for queen to g6, threatening a mate in 1 on g2, but this rook on c3 was already intending to go to the king side. So going to g3 is exactly what Chessborn does, stopping the mate in 1 and counter-threatening the queen on g6. So the queen has to move, maybe to, h6, check. Okay, rook h3 would be a very big blunder there, because the queen can just take this rook. So luckily for Chessborn, she finds the correct move, king g1. Stepping off this diagonal of the bishop. But now there's maybe some problems on c1. So black could already maybe force a draw away, perhaps with queen c1 and back to h6. Although it's not really a perpetual. So some good moves here by both players. They're playing really, really good chess, I believe. Chessborn doing a great job of... Oh my... I was going to say keeping the game going and looking for tactics, and look at this, bishop d5, what a tactical blow by Lina. Wow, that is such a great move. What does white do here? Chessborn is really, really running low on timer, and there's not really much choice. I mean, if she takes the bishop, there's rook to c1, winning the queen. I mean, it is for a rook and bishop, but yes, she has to take this piece off the board, and now there will be rook c1, which is a checkmate basically, but the queen intercepts and the queen is lost. So black has a winning position, a queen for a rook and bishop, and also an extra pawn here. So this is devastating for Chessborn with only 18 seconds left and material down, and she needs a win here in this position. But there's also now queen to d2, double attacking both the rook on e1 and bishop d5, and of course Lina sees this. And there's no choice here. She will grab an extra pawn for the bishop, but this is not enough. This is completely lost for Chessborn. What a brilliant move. Bishop d5, completely shutting down all counterplay, immediately winning for black. Beautifully, beautifully played. It's over. The only way Chessborn can win is maybe on time. Both players are really, really low on time. But yeah, the position is hopeless for white. And black is just grabbing pawn after pawn. There's a check, but the rook simply blocks. There won't be the rook trade. The rook goes back to e3. And Lina has 2 versus 1 on the queen side, so she just pushes those pawns, creating a pass pawn. Chessborn still trying to fight, move the king back to g1. Pawns are traded, and that's a pass pawn on b4. Rook to e7. The pawn just marches. There's no play for white. A check, allowing the pawn to get all the way down to b2, I assume. Yes. Beautiful technique by Lena. What a good game by her if she's able to convert this into a win. 7 seconds and 20. She makes some air for the king, not allowing any potential mates. g3 is really, really low on time, and now with the rook trade, the game is completely over. Lina trades rooks, and she will get an extra queen on b1, and now it's just a matter of technique. A couple of checks still remain for white, but unfortunately for Chessborn, this position is beyond hopeless. There's no way that Lina will not be able to convert this. And she has 16 seconds versus 7. She's just shaking her head, but she's got to move, and she does. Moves the queen to d3, rook to f2. Goes for a check, king to h2. Let's see if she can find a way to mate. She has to move those 8 seconds. She sees it. She's panicking a little bit, but she just goes for a move. She finds queen f5, 7 seconds though. Both players really playing on their increment g4, and yeah, now it's completely over. Queen check, queen to h1, rook h2, queen h2, checkmate. And Lina is the first finalist. What a match. So yeah, Lina, the first finalist of the Real Chess League Season 2. Who will she face? You'll see in the next episode.
Once again, a very exciting game.
Yes.
I don't know what to say. I felt very oppressed by pieces, and maybe can be the opening looked a little bit boring, but after you get an isolated pawn, it was a little bit unbalanced, and then your pieces are much powerful than mine.
Yeah, so I wanted to take with the pawn. I mean, if I take with the knight, then it's a little bit more boring.
Yeah.
And if I'm taking with the pawn, then it's d5 what I played later, and then basically my bishop is opened in the mother, and pieces are activated. And then I think you made a mistake. But I think the bishop c5 was not the correct move there. Maybe bishop d5, the pinning your bishop, and you cannot go basically with any of your piece because your rook was pinned to f7. Your knight is pinned to the bishop, and
my piece had many problems. And rook d7 and e7 here. It was very powerful, and I couldn't move with my pieces.
Yeah. I just spent a lot of time calculating some lines and then didn't go for them. But and I think the time decided mostly, and I didn't have time to think about other lines. Yeah.
Maybe why did you play to rook c2?
Because I wanted to be protected. Because
but I thought that you can
take on b7 and then
take.
But then somehow my rook is pinned, and I thought you will play like rook e8, and then I don't know, your rooks were active.
But this line I got much more advantage.
I agree. I should have come for that. I don't know. I was actually, when I went for this line, I was planning to take on b7, take on e5. Then I saw some ghosts, and that's like my rook was pinned, and it was not very.
Thank you for the game.
Yeah.